Có thể mình gắn ở sau này, đằng sau cái sau mà cha project ở đó, rồi xong rồi tôi cho nó xuống nó nhìn vô,
không có project như vậy nữa, mà không project là đợi tới một chút. Nhưng mà để bởi vì mua cái gì như vậy.
Yeah, they're just stage. I just wasn't trying to need the old school pointer. Is that good? It's my background. It's random, so I didn't pick that for this, it changes, but that's random photos I selected. I realized that was gonna happen, I was wondering what it was gonna be, I was hoping it would be something incriminating, like, you know, so I know, that's pretty good. Thank you so much.
So if I do inflict, it looks like I'm doing inflicting towards the vocals, but it's towards the north. Well, good evening.
Good evening, Father.
How are you?
Greetings.
Okay, well, we're gonna begin with our our second session, and let's first say a prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you for your blessings and for the abundant graces that you pour upon us during these Easter times, this Passion time. Help us this evening to be open to your invitation to be pilgrims, bearers of hope, and to enrich our faith through our learning of the historical origins of pilgrimage. Mother Mary, we ask you to intercede for us. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, I mentioned yesterday that I invited Dr. Christopher West to share some of his presentations. When Father Vincent invited me to do this mission, and he said, I want to do it on the Jubilee, honestly, right away I thought, I can do this if I invite Christopher. Because I knew he had been doing some talks for the catechetical school, right? About this topic, and we're colleagues at the seminary. He teaches, especially, well, a lot of classes, but his main area of interest is history in general, although he has some of the most bizarre areas of interest as well. You probably want to share some of the random facts or languages that.
I mean, I specialize in good old-fashioned European history, but I'm also very into like history of Tibetan Buddhism and China.
What languages have you learned? Languages that are not super useful, but super interesting?
So at the seminary, I teach Greek and Latin, but those are relatively normal. In my doctoral work, I studied medieval Russian and Syriac, which is sort of a language sort of related to Arabic and Hebrew. I studied Old English, which is not, everyone thinks Old English is just Shakespeare. Shakespeare is modern English still, you know, it's boring. Old English, here's the opening lines of the old sound like this. So you can tell it's not modern English, but that's something I'm gonna do as well.
Anyway, so Christopher is going to talk about the historical roots of Jubilee/pilgrimage, and I think this will be very enriching for us because faith and reason come together. So knowing some of these facts, although one might think, well, I was expecting something more devotional, actually can enrich our devotion. And with that, just a reminder that tomorrow I will connect, hopefully, some of these dots and talk specifically about the histories of the Triduum, the Paschal Triduum, as a way of going on this pilgrimage. So with that, thank you, Christopher.
Thank you, Father. Well, I'm really happy to be with you all today. I've driven by this parish many times. Now I finally stopped inside, so it's nice. So I live in Boulder, so I work at the seminary and I come by here to go home. So it's nice to finally be in the building. Thank you all so much for welcoming me. As Father Carter said, I will be giving a presentation on pilgrimage and Christian tradition. We'll talk about the theology of pilgrimage, the history of pilgrimage, why do Christians engage in pilgrimage, etc. The reason that we're discussing this topic immediately is because I believe Father Carter discussed it yesterday. This is a Jubilee year in the Catholic Church, which is the year of pilgrimage. So we read in Leviticus, one of the books from the Old Testament, a passage which says, quote, "Thou shalt sanctify the 50th year, and shalt proclaim remission to all the inhabitants of thy land, for it is the year of Jubilee." So there's an Old Testament precedent. In ancient Israel, every 50 years, they basically had a year of celebration and expiation of sins. And so, picking up on the Old Testament past, the Catholic Church, with John Crescenti, eventually picked up this tradition of declaring every, at this point, 25 years, but originally it was 50 in the Old Testament. Christians get excited and they don't want to wait 50 years, so instead we just only do 25. But Christians picked up this tradition about celebrating every few decades or so and enjoying a year of Jubilee, and the Christian tradition especially became a year of pilgrimage, which we'll talk about. Again, there's Old Testament precedents for the Catholic Christian practices we participate in today. So in the Catholic Church, the first Jubilee historically was in the year 1300, 700 years ago. Originally the Jubilee was celebrated every 50 years, more or less. But again, Christians get excited, they just can't wait. Eventually it became, from being every 50 years, 1300 to 1350, 1400, 1450, 1475. It eventually became every 25 years, so 1450 to 1475, 1500 to 1525, 1525 to 1550, et cetera, and so on to the present day. You're probably saying, well, what about these other years? This doesn't seem to be every 50 years or 25 years because I had to skip some of the cell blocks. In fact, these blue bubbles show irregular Jubilee years. We get it, again, Christians just can't wait. They're always so excited to engage in Jubilee and to celebrate. So over the course of Catholic history, every once in a while, special Jubilee years we proclaimed. Most recently, we had one in 2016. There was another one in 1983. These fall on irregular years, not every 25 years, but irregular intervals within those 25 years. But strictly speaking, we're following the rules as the Catholic Church operates today. We celebrate the Jubilee every 25 years. It's a tradition going all the way back to 1300, and it's continued through the 1300s, the 1400s, the 1500s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s to the present day. And now with 2025, we're not in an extraordinary Jubilee year, it's a normal Jubilee year, but nonetheless a year of celebration and, as we said, a year of pilgrimage. And so, my presentation plan focuses primarily on this phenomenon of Christian pilgrimage. That's specifically what I'll present. Pilgrimage, generally conceived, broadly imagined. So, we'll begin by answering the question, what is pilgrimage? We'll define the term and the concept. We'll then consider what happens on a pilgrimage. We'll answer the question, why go on a pilgrimage? And then finally, we'll consider where specifically one might go on a pilgrimage. So again, the presentation on the general topic of pilgrimage in Christian tradition, we'll study the history and theology of this phenomenon. We begin with our first point. What is pilgrimage? I want to start with terminology. So this word, pilgrim, and then relatedly pilgrimage, are English words, but they have very much older roots. They actually originally come from Latin terms. Our English word pilgrim comes from a Latin word peregrinus. And originally, before the rise of Christianity, the word peregrinus in Latin didn't refer to sort of pilgrim in a spiritual sense, as we understand it in Christianity. Instead, the word peregrinus originally referred to a foreigner or a stranger or a traveler. So if you're from Colorado and there's someone visiting from Idaho or Connecticut or Alaska or Vietnam or Europe, they're a peregrinus, simply a foreigner, a stranger, a traveler. So the original meaning of this word that in Christian context becomes translated as pilgrim, in our mind evokes all these spiritual concepts. Before the rise of Christianity, going all the way back to the years BC, in the Latin language, just simply meant a foreigner, a stranger, a traveler, someone who's not from the local place. However, with the rise of Christianity, beginning around 0 AD, but continuing through the centuries, this Latin word peregrinus, which originally meant foreigner, stranger, traveler, became adopted in Christian context, and it began to mean what you all probably assume when you hear that word pilgrim. Some sort of spiritual meaning, some sort of traveler who's engaging on a religious expedition or adventure. So in Christian context, a concept developed, and peregrinus became not understood as a foreigner, stranger, traveler, but more specifically as a pilgrim, as you understand the word. Specifically, pilgrims engage in pilgrimage. We could define pilgrimage as a practice in which participants, as we say pilgrims, visit holy sites for spiritual purposes. So they visit sacred locations for a specific spiritual reason. There's this 13th century law code, so it's from the Middle Ages, the 1200s in Spain, and it gives pilgrims certain legal privileges, but it first defines sort of what a pilgrim is, and it describes the phenomenon of pilgrimage. So I'll read this quote for you because I think it captures the flavor, the essence, the nature of Christian pilgrimage. This line from 800 years ago tells us that men or women undertake pilgrimages to serve God and honor the saints. And to do this, they leave their families and their native soil, and their wives and their homes, and all that they have, and go through alien lands, wearying their bodies and expending their goods in the pursuit of holy places. So people pursue holy places for spiritual purposes, perhaps undertaking risk in doing so, leaving behind their families and their homelands, and they travel far away to seek special holy sites in alien lands for, again, spiritual gain, spiritual purposes. We might ask, now that we've defined the concept of pilgrimage, is pilgrimage permissible in the Christian tradition? Obviously it is, or else I wouldn't be giving this presentation. But there's a discourse in Christianity, especially in the early centuries, that sort of debated the value or even the permissibility of pilgrimage. There's a famous church father, St. Jerome. He was alive at the end of the 300s and early 400s. And he says, quote, "I do not dare to combine the omnipotence of God in some small territory." So he's kind of criticizing the practice of Christian pilgrimage and saying, why do we need to go visit these holy sites? Why do we need to travel to Rome or Jerusalem, etc., to visit holy sites associated with God? Isn't God all powerful? Isn't God the supreme, almighty Lord of the universe? Isn't he present, in a sense, everywhere? Why do we need to go to specific places? Jerome continues, "The heavenly palace can be reached as easily from Britain as from Jerusalem." And in this context, he's saying Britain because in Jerome's time, in the 300s and 400s, Britain was part of the Roman Empire in which Jerome lived, but it was sort of the farthest, most northernmost part of the Roman Empire in the northwest. It was on the edge of the world as they would conceive it. So he's saying Britain, it's some random sort of rural, faraway place. God can be there just as easily as he can be in Jerusalem, unequivocally the holiest site in Christianity. So Jerome is voicing this perhaps critique of pilgrimage. There's an irony here though. Jerome himself says this, but Jerome, again, ironically spent the majority of his life overseeing a monastery in Bethlehem, the site where the Nativity of the Lord took place, the site where the Lord was born. And Jerome was originally from Croatia, but he spent much of his adulthood far away from his homeland in the west of Europe, in Croatia, tending this particularly important holy site in the Holy Land at Bethlehem. So Jerome himself is kind of, he's a cantankerous man, he's a holy saint, he can also be a little, he's very smart and kind of likes to critique people. Here Jerome is maybe caught a little bit because Jerome is critiquing pilgrimage, but he himself is basically on a lifelong pilgrimage, spending the majority of his adult life in the Holy Land himself. This image of Jerome is by the great master of the late Spanish Renaissance, El Greco. I wanted to show you a few pictures of Jerome, paintings of Jerome, I should say. He's probably the most frequently depicted figure in the history of Western Christian art after Jesus Christ and after the Mother of God. So he's very, if you go to the museums of Europe, they're littered with pictures of Jerome. He's very frequently portrayed, and he's frequently portrayed as an old man, as you see here. So here's Jerome, the old man, and you can see the artist is showing off his ability to realistically portray the skin of an old monk who spent a long time mortifying his flesh through the asceticism and the intense practices that monks perform, but nonetheless he's very strong and fit despite his age. So there's a skill to depicting the skin in that way, and I think the artist is sort of showing off by doing it as such. That's a tip if you go to the museums of Europe and you're looking at Renaissance or Baroque art. Try to figure out what the artist is showing off. What are they doing to demonstrate their technical mastery? And El Greco, I think, is doing so by its really effective means of portraying the old skin of Jerome. Other painters also do this. Here's another famous painting of Jerome by another great artist of the Renaissance, Titian. Same theme. Jerome has done much penance in the desert, practicing asceticism as a monk, but nonetheless he's got sort of a virility, a strength to his body, despite the old age, and I think there's that tension that's captured very well by Titian here. I could show you so many paintings of Jerome, the old ascetic. Again, one of the most frequently portrayed figures in the history of Western Christian art. Here's one by the great Caravaggio, with the Baroque, but there's so many examples. Jerome in the wilderness, Jerome on, again, lifelong pilgrimage in a sense, overseeing a monastery at the site of Bethlehem. Jerome's not the only figure from the Christian tradition to maybe question the practice of pilgrimage. Here's another figure from the 800s, a bishop in modern-day France called Théodulf of Orléans. It's a great name for children, Théodulf. No one uses these old Germanic names. There's other great Germanic names that I recommend you when you're going to have children. great saints that no one's naming their kids after anymore. There's Willibrord, Willibald, Winfrith, Athelwald, Oswald, Dunstan, Guthlac, all great names. Cuthbert, Alfreach, all great names. That's the same language I did at the front. The old English names. No one's using these names anymore, so you could name your child Theodulf if you want. But Theodulf says, God is not to be sought in any particular place. I do not believe that one reaches heaven by the path of the feet, but by the path of conduct. So Theodulf is saying, why are you traveling to these holy sites with your feet? What matters is living a virtuous, ethical life, not necessarily traveling to distant holy sites. So this is some examples of dissent from the concept of Christian pilgrimage. Sorry, bad joke. In the Christian tradition, generally speaking, Christians love to go on pilgrimage. These are the minority, for the most part, from a very early period. Christians are practicing and engaging in pilgrimage. We might ask, does a pilgrimage need to cover a certain distance? Not necessarily. As we'll see, pilgrims in the Christian tradition have gone to faraway places. For many people, like Rome, like Jerusalem, like Spain, like England, very far for us. But there's also pilgrimage opportunities close to home, which is available to us in this Jubilee year. We can go on pilgrimages to our cathedral to attain some of the benefits of pilgrimage. Does a pilgrimage need to have a certain goal for its destination? Usually pilgrims are seeking holy sites. So in a sense, a certain holy site, but beyond that, it's open. There's many holy sites that one can go on for a pilgrimage. So we've defined our terms, pilgrim and pilgrimage. We've introduced these concepts in Christian tradition. Let's move forward now to a brief overview of the history of Christian pilgrimage. So this is a complex phenomenon. You could write a whole very long book about the history of Christian pilgrimage. I'm just going to give you a distilled, condensed version of the overall trend and trajectory in the history of this phenomenon in the Christian tradition. So at first, with the rise of Christianity in the first centuries of the new religion, pilgrims visited sites associated with the life of Christ. So they visited the Holy Land, sites associated with the birth, the death, the resurrection of our Lord, and the Holy Land itself is the first classic site of historic Christian pilgrimage. Some of the earliest, in fact, the earliest historical records we have of Christians undertaking pilgrimages are documents from around the year 300 AD, and it's Christians visiting the Holy Land. So the Holy Land becomes sort of the first site of Christian pilgrimage for the obvious reasons. People want to go to the holiest place on the Christian earth, the place where Christ himself once walked. As I said, the earliest surviving accounts of Christian pilgrimage date to around the 300s AD. We have records of various travelers in the centuries of early Christianity that visited especially the Holy Land. Amongst those visitors was this woman. This is an image from the 800s AD from modern day Turkey. But what it shows is a Roman empress. In fact, the mother of the first Christian emperor, the Emperor Constantine. If you have studied Christian history, you might have heard that Constantine was the first Christian emperor. This was a great pivotal watershed in the history of the spread of Christianity. Previously, before Constantine was emperor in the 300s AD, the emperors had been pagan, and so they had persecuted Christians who refused to worship pagan gods. But with the conversion of Constantine to Christianity, the former persecutors now became baptized members of the Christian community, and the Roman government, including the chiefs of the Roman government, the emperors, were now official patrons and members of the Christian community. So Constantine converted to Christianity. And his mother herself was a dedicated Christian, and she's a saint in the Catholic tradition. Her name is Saint Helena. So Helena, as the mother of Constantine, embarked on this famous voyage in the history of Christian pilgrimage, in which she visited the Holy Land, and while there, she discovered one of the most prized, most precious artifacts in the Christian tradition, the relic of the true cross, the wooden cross upon which Jesus Christ himself had been crucified. So here you see Helena dressed as a visiting empress. That's a very fly, attractive way for women to dress, wearing the imperial purple and the gold and the crowns. But Helena is on her throne here, and then this scene shows her traveling to the Holy Land and discovering, as you see, the true cross in Jerusalem, and the true cross became a prized object in Christianity. So we've been talking about the history of Christian pilgrimage and the first pilgrims visiting the Holy Land, but thereafter in subsequent centuries, the end of antiquity, the 300, 400, 500, 600s AD, the beginning of the Middle Ages, the 600, 700, 800s AD, through the year 1500, pilgrimage became ubiquitous in Christianity. So the earliest records we have are Christians visiting the Holy Land, but very quickly thereafter, We have records of pilgrims visiting all kinds of holy sites in Christendom, sites in Italy like Rome, sites in Turkey like the city Constantinople, which is today the modern day Istanbul, sites in France, etc. So Christian pilgrimage becomes ubiquitous throughout the Christian world, and it's a very common, popular spiritual practice and exercise. Pilgrimage, of course, persists into the present day. We continue to go on pilgrimages as Christians, and including in these special years of pilgrimage, like the Jubilee. So this is our overview of the history of Christian pilgrimage. Let's consider some more precise questions. So for example, we could ask, what historically happened on pilgrimage? So then we'll begin to answer this question. So historically, including in the Middle Ages, from 500 to 1500 AD, pilgrimage often began with a public liturgical blessing and a pilgrim vow. So here you see a manuscript from the 1500s AD, and it shows the inauguration of the Christian pilgrimage. Here you see a bishop, and he's blessing the objects that pilgrims would carry with them on their voyage, the satchels or the luggage that a pilgrim would carry as they traveled, and the walking staff that a pilgrim would use as they voyaged on their journey. And you see the pilgrims in the background, but the bishop is engaging in a public liturgical blessing of the pilgrims and the objects that they'll bring with them on their expedition. Pilgrims would also take a vow, assuming sort of a certain sacral status. They're departing normal life and entering into a special zone where they're no longer sort of living life as they would do so under normal conditions. Now they're pilgrims, and they're explicitly on a spiritual mission to attain the holy sites that they've chosen as their final destination. So pilgrimage kind of can be marked by leaving behind what's normal and entering into a new state, a state where you're very deliberately pursuing a spiritual goal through the practice of pilgrimage so you can grow in devout life. Pilgrimage in the ancient world, in some ways today, depending on where you're going, could be a dangerous and difficult undertaking. So, for example, historically, pilgrims were prey to things like bandits, people far from home traveling in foreign parts of the world, were very exposed to predatory locals who might try to take advantage of them as they're far from their homes. Pilgrimage could be frequently today, very expensive. So pilgrims assumed a lot of expense in order to travel across the world to access these holy sites. Pilgrims were susceptible to illnesses. If you're from England and you're on pilgrimage to Rome and you get sick along the journey, you're in a very vulnerable, dangerous position. So pilgrimages could be dangerous and difficult undertakings. As such, pilgrims often drew up their will before departing. So historically, a pilgrim was aware of the peril of the exercise in which they were embarking, and so they often, knowing the risks, drew up a will, preparing for the worst in case they never made it back home. Pilgrims could also face, and they still face today sometimes, language problems. So again, if you're from England and you're in Italy, you're speaking a completely different language than the locals. There's no Google Translate to help you out. So pilgrims are in a vulnerable condition for many reasons, one of which is because they're not speaking local languages. They're prey to swindlers, people who know local prices or know sort of local customs, and they're going to really take advantage of pilgrims. That definitely still happens today. Locals knowing people are foreign and charging them exaggerated prices, etc. So with all these perils in mind, historically, pilgrims often had a distinct legal status. We saw that law code from which I quoted about pilgrimage to begin the presentation sort of defines what a pilgrim is and what they're doing, and pilgrims were granted special legal statuses trying to protect them from the dangers they were facing. So for example, pilgrims were exempt from tolls. Certain tolls that you might have to pay to use a road or something, a pilgrim wouldn't necessarily have to do that because they're on a special journey, and local governments want to try to find ways to help them attain their destination. Other laws mandated that pilgrims should receive accommodations. So local people had an obligation to sort of help house foreigners, help house these pilgrims and speed them on their way. Assailants of pilgrims could be subject to special punishment. So legal codes recognized that pilgrims were in special danger due to their foreignness, and so people who would prey on pilgrims were subject to especially strict punishments. The property of an absent pilgrim could also be placed under special protection. So once more, if you're a pilgrim from England in the year 1280, you're traveling all the way to Jerusalem, you're going to be gone a while, and there's the danger of leaving your stuff behind
And when you return, if you return, finding that it's gone, someone took it, someone's occupying your house, bad things could happen if you're gone for a long time, months. So pilgrims enjoyed certain legal protections in which their property was placed under special protection from people who might try to take stuff from pilgrims while they're gone. It was also possible historically to obtain the benefits of a pilgrimage by paying someone else to go on your behalf. So if you're old or infirm and you can't go on the pilgrimage but you want the spiritual benefits, you could finance someone to go on pilgrimage for you and visit the holy sites in Rome or in Jerusalem or in Spain and accrue the spiritual benefits on your behalf. So
I volunteer.
for me, yeah, are you volunteering to finance me? Because I'll take you up on that. Yeah, this is an attractive option. I'm sure there are many people in here that would be willing to go if someone doesn't want to. So, this is what happened historically on a pilgrimage. Let's answer the question, why go on pilgrimage? Why do these things? So, we should recognize first and foremost that historically, we're living primarily in the pre-modern world right now. People were very, very devout and very fervently religious. You couldn't escape religion. Religion was part of daily life, and it's saturating everyday experience. And so people went on pilgrimage, we should recognize, might seem obvious, but for prayer and devotion, for spiritual purposes, in order to attain a spiritual good. Specifically, or more specifically, pilgrims frequently sought to visit certain attractive locales, certain desirable destinations, because of the presence there of relics. So pilgrims frequently went on pilgrimage to go to a specific site that had particularly holy relics that the pilgrim could then venerate while they're there. So let's dive into this question a bit further. What is a relic? A relic is a holy object in Christianity, sometimes associated with a saint, but the most important prized relics, the most precious relics in the Christian tradition are typically those associated with Jesus Christ himself. So there are various relics associated with the life of Christ in Christian history. Famous relics are thorns from the crown that he wore during his passion, wood from the true cross, which we talked about a few moments ago, nails that pierced the Lord's flesh. Even in the Middle Ages, there were relics that claimed to be vials of Christ's blood that he had poured out during the Passion, etc. So the most prized relics, the most precious relics in the Christian tradition are those associated with the incarnate Lord himself, Jesus Christ. Alongside those, the most prized relics traditionally were relics associated with our Lord's mother, Mary, the Mother of God. Now, the reason I've got this for you here is because that's hair. There are various famous relics in Christian tradition which claim to be strands of the Mother of God's hair. But in the Middle Ages, there were other objects associated with Mary that were particularly precious as well. For example, the cloak that she wore when she gave birth to Christ, her other forms of her clothing. There are even churches that claim to have, again, vials, not this time of blood, but of the Virgin Mary's breast milk, etc. And so relics associated with Christ and the Mother of God were the most prized in Christian tradition. More common, though, are relics. This is the A list of relics. I don't know what happened. My computer's still on this, so I don't know why the projector shut down.
Still. Maybe you get that.
Can we turn it off?
Is your computer still on?
My computer's still on here.
We turn it off until it back on.
Is it hot?
Yeah, very hot. It's empty. I'll turn it back on. We need a fan.
Is it on its own right now?
Yeah, it's on.
It's blinking.
Yeah, it's on. So basically, it opened it. Yeah, it's very hot.
We're just a great part with lots of great photos too.
Old fashioned luxury.
Yeah.
He's out there.
Is there any precedent for this? Does it come back on? Do you know?
No, I'm just still thinking. It's still thinking that it looks like a church go on, but it's not. It's come along right now. Come along, so. And at least. Is he not? Okay, yeah, so. That meantime, you get that you want right now. Yeah, he does. This one off right here. Must be where we said. Yeah. Come back. Yeah.
See? Could be anything. So amongst the more common relics are those associated with the bodies of the saints. So to have the whole body of the saint was a particularly prized thing. You've got the whole intact body of St. Francis of Assisi, the whole intact body of St. Thomas Aquinas, the whole intact body of St. Padre Pio. That's a particularly desirable object to have enshrined at your local church. However, frequently in the past and today, relics were broken up into pieces. So to have the whole body of the saint is great, but usually the bodies of the saints were distributed to various holy sites throughout Europe and throughout the world. And so, as I said, usually they're parceled out to different locations. So to have the whole body is probably the best thing, but to have the skull is a particularly valuable object. But in the Middle Ages and in the present day, churches could be renowned for their relic collections just by having the tooth, for example, a particularly prominent and important saint. These are all body part relics, but there's also the phenomenon of what are called contact relics, which are objects that are not part of the physical body of the saint, but objects associated with the saint in their life. For example, maybe some item of the saint's clothing. Perhaps you have the shoe of Saint Teresa of Avila. Perhaps you have the cloak of John on the Cross. Blood-stained clothing of the martyrs could also be especially desired. So these are all examples of the objects that pilgrims would seek as they travel on pilgrimage, the types of things they wanted to venerate that were housed at these holy sites. Relics were frequently and are frequently kept and displayed in what are called reliquaries. So this is an old phenomenon in the Christian tradition. This is one of the earliest extant reliquaries we have, surviving reliquaries. It's from the 300s AD. It was probably financed by St. Ambrose, the great church father, who was Bishop of Milan. And as you can see, it's a reliquary, and then it's a case or a vessel, a house for the precious relics kept inside. So this is a silver box from the 300s AD, one of the earliest reliquaries in the Christian tradition. You can see this scene shows Solomon, I think that's what it is, and he's dividing. It's the judgment of Solomon trying to decide who gets the baby. And then he says, we'll cut it in half, and then the person who doesn't want to cut it in half receives the baby. Other scenes, no, this is the judgment of Solomon. Here you see Solomon in judgment and the baby, which will be delivered to its rightful mother. This reliquary has other scenes as well. Anyone guess what that is?
There's a fire.
Yes, the three boys in the furnace being rescued by the angel from the Old Testament. This is one of the earliest surviving reliquaries we have. Moving forward into the Middle Ages, a few hundred years after Ambrose, here's a relic from the 800s AD. This is typical of early medieval relics from about, let's say, 500 to 1000 AD. They're gold, and they're just studded with lots of jewels and gems, precious stones surrounding the gold. So these are reliquaries that are in sort of boxes that are meant to house the precious objects inside. Reliquaries can take different shapes. Here are some of my favorite reliquaries. This is a genre of metalwork of reliquary art called the crux gemata, which in Latin means the gemmed cross, the bedazzled cross, if you will. These reliquaries were meant to house wood from the true cross upon which Christ was crucified. So you see ᴡᴇᴇᴅᴜ here, reliquaries in the shapes of crosses, and they're housing wood from the true cross itself. One of my favorite examples of a ᴡᴇᴜᴜ is from the 1000s AD. This is in the imperial treasury of the Holy Roman Empire, today kept in Vienna. And the Holy Roman emperors had very, very prized relics, including the lance which pierced the Lord's side, according to Christian tradition, and then a major reliquary of the true cross that housed the wood of the true cross on the inside. And again, you can see the exquisite metalwork, the jewels, the gold, meant to enshrine these sacral objects. There's another angle. So examples of reliquaries from a few centuries later. This is from around the year 1000. Let's move forward in the late 1100s, around 1200. Again, boxes meant to house sacred objects. This is a genre of reliquary that you see quite commonly in European museums. It's gold with blue enamel. It's called ʟᴜᴜ. It's produced from a city in the center of France. And again, it's a gold reliquary with enamel decorations. This one with Christ in judgment, surrounded by apostles, and also Christ on the cross, etc. Reliquaries can be quite large. These are relatively small objects. If you saw them in a museum, this one would be probably that large, but these chests could get quite big. This is one of the largest gold medieval box reliquaries we have. It's the Shrine of the Three Kings in Köln, Germany. It housed relics associated with the three kings, the three magi who visited Christ at the Nativity. To communicate its size, here's another image. Here is behind the altar. You can see people in the background. It's a huge, large gold box that weighs a few hundred kilograms, meant to house these precious objects associated with magi. As you move forward in the Middle Ages, reliquaries oftentimes frequently become transparent through rock crystal, and they're meant to display the precious object on the inside. So here's a reliquary, a rock crystal reliquary from around 1200 AD, and the relic is on the inside, and you can actually kind of faintly see it through the crystal. Later reliquaries especially sought to expose the relic to observation from the outside. Here's a pretty normal Gothic reliquary from around 1400 AD, and you can see that this is an elaborate object, and it's enshrining the relic, which would be housed on the inside for people to behold. Reliquaries could also be configured in the shape of the saint whose body they housed. So here's the earliest reliquary ever that follows that style. This is the reliquary of Sainte Croix from France. It's from the 900s AD, and it's supposed to be a depiction of the saint, the martyr saint, Sainte Croix, who's got her relics housed on the inside. This is the earliest surviving example we have of a reliquary that's in the shape of the saint on the inside. You see this in France. It's probably about this big. It's quite large, but again, really elaborate, gold, jewels, etc. So this trend is common in subsequent centuries and today. Here's the reliquary of St. Ursula, and again, St. Ursula, and it shows St. Ursula. Sometimes reliquaries will also be produced in the shape of the specific body part that's being housed on the inside. So what do you think's on the inside of this? The arm, right? Yeah, the arm bone. So the arm bone is being enshrined on the inside. Say it again?
It's the same too.
I don't know specifically who it is. This is a pretty common, there's hundreds of examples of these in the museums of Europe. Reliquaries housing the arm bone that are in this shape. Another one that I'm sure you can guess. This one houses the foot of a saint. It's from 1450 AD. And again, it houses the holy foot of a saint. And it's made in the shape of the foot. It's really cool. Yeah, I love that one. If you move into the Baroque art is very dramatic and very grand, very flamboyant. In the Baroque period, you get things like this, where whole skeletons of martyrs are being decorated with all these gold and jewels and gems. But again, it's these objects that pilgrims are traveling to visit specifically. What makes a site holy frequently is a site that houses objects like this, the bones or the body parts or the possessions of a precious saint, whether of God or even Jesus Christ. So that leads to scenes like this from the 1400s, where you see a king and he's on pilgrimage and he's kneeling before the type of relic we've just seen, venerating it, getting special access, friends or assistants that are trying to bring him to the holy sites that he can attain healing. Another scene showing saints being, individuals being healed on pilgrimage is this one. It's from the 1200s. It's from Spain. It shows a maimed pilgrim. You can see his illnesses in his eyes. You can see his eyes are also red and inflamed and sick, but he travels to a site with a relic of the Mother of God, and this image is showing the Mother of God. It's personifying the relics and showing her coming down and healing his eyes, and now his eyes are pure and whole. He's attained healing at this site. Another example is this, from the 1200s in England. People wanted close contact and access to the relics, and so some relic sites actually facilitated close access. Sometimes people could even climb into the tomb that the body was kept and sort of get really close to it. So here's a scene showing pilgrims, and there's little holes on the side of the tomb. They're climbing the tomb to get as close as possible to the body of the holy dead as they can, as they seek to obtain healing. Sometimes these practices could get pretty intense. We'll meet St. Thomas Becket in a minute. He was a famous bishop who was martyred around the year 1200. And Thomas Becket, his body became enshrined in a very prominent pilgrim site in Canterbury, England. And pilgrims would travel there, and at Canterbury, the monks of Canterbury kept vials of Thomas Becket's blood there, and they would occasionally get drops of Thomas Becket's blood and mix them with water and give them to pilgrims to drink. And pilgrims would guzzle down these concoctions in the hope of attaining healing through the intercession of Thomas Becket. And here you see a medieval stained glass that shows precisely that scene. There's a pilgrim, he's sick. This monk has a bowl with the blood of Thomas Becket mixed with water, and the pilgrim is about to drink it in order to attain healing. Pilgrims could seek to attain healing from physical illnesses, but also from possession or diabolical influence. This scene shows a pilgrim who has visited the shrine of Thomas Becket, and he's been possessed by a demon. They're administering the water mixed with a few bloods of Thomas Becket, mixed with a few drops of the blood of Thomas Becket. The pilgrim's drinking it, and you see the demon being expelled from him as he does so. So pilgrims would visit these sites to seek healing and cures. Sometimes it was also a common practice, and can be a common practice today, to be healed through the intercession of the saints. You might be at home and you might pray to a saint for healing, and you might also promise that saint that if you heal me, I will visit your pilgrimage site and go on a journey there. And so sometimes people would visit pilgrimage sites to give thanks for healings already received. So they might go to be healed, or they might go to give thanks for a cure that had already been administered to them. Another very essential element in Christian pilgrimage traditionally is undertaking pilgrimage in order to seek penance, or to perform an act of penance for one's sins. And this is where the concept of indulgences can also come into play. So in the Middle Ages, frequently penances weren't just say 3 Hail Marys, you're fine. Your priest might order you to go on pilgrimage to Rome from England or something. If you did something really bad, you got a pretty strict penance that would require you to really risk a lot and travel far at great expense. Connected to this idea of penance, though, is this concept of indulgences. Let's zoom out from this slide for a second and talk about indulgences, which is a theological concept in Catholicism. And we can obtain indulgences through pilgrimage. So, let's begin with the principle, the idea that mortal sin separates us from God. When we commit some sort of grave act of sin, our relationship with God is broken. We are separated from Him to a degree. Confession is a normal means of repairing the rupture that happens with God when we commit mortal sin. So we go to confession, our relationship with God is restored, the break is repaired, our sins are forgiven, and our relationship with God is restored. The result of that is that no eternal, the keyword being eternal punishment, that is to say hell, follows. So if you commit some sort of grave sin, you go to confession, you're truly penitent, you confess it, your sins are forgiven, and you will not be punished eternally. God, in His goodness and His benevolence and His mercy, has removed an eternal debt that's owed to Him, which in theory we owe to God because God is supremely good. He's created us, He gives us everything we have. When we offend Him, we owe Him big, but He became man, He suffered, died, He rose, He poured out His precious blood in order to make it so that we wouldn't go to hell for the sins that we commit against Him. However, for the sake of justice, and this is where things get a little more complicated, even after we go to confession and confess our sins and receive forgiveness so that we don't have an eternal punishment, hell won't follow, we still owe temporal punishment for our sins. And this is the key concept for indulgences, temporal punishment. That is to say, we won't be punished eternally, but we still owe time in purgatory to God as a temporal punishment that we pay for our sins. Purgatory in the Catholic tradition is defined as the condition after death where souls are purified and punishment is repaid. An analogy might be, think about if you steal something from someone. If you steal something from someone and you commit a grave sin, you can go to them and apologize and they can forgive you and the relationship can be fixed. You don't get to keep the thing you stole, you have to give it back. And you might even have to kind of give a little bit more of a punishment. You might have to pay extra money to make up for inconveniences you caused the person. You might have to do other things to sort of truly set things right. So again, we go to confession, God can forgive us, the relationship can be restored, but akin to the analogy I just gave, if you steal something from someone, you're probably gonna have to do something to truly make things right. You're gonna have to give the thing back, you're gonna have to maybe pay a little extra to account for any inconveniences you caused the person. That's what this temporal punishment is. It's kind of paying a little extra to make up out of justice for what we've done wrong. And again, according to Christian Catholic theology, purgatory is the condition after death where souls go, and they're purified after death, and the punishment, the temporal punishment they owe God for the sake of justice is repaid. So we can basically pay off the temporal punishments we owe by going to purgatory. And here you see a Gothic altar from the 1400s, and it shows souls being purified so that they can stand holy before God in heaven after they've been purified in purgatory. However, there's another way beyond purgatory that we can also basically pay back God for the temporal punishment we owe. We can complete penances in life, therefore reducing time in purgatory. So if we do good things in life, certain meritorious acts, we can reduce the time in purgatory that we owe God as temporal punishment for our sins. So certain virtuous acts, things like reciting the rosary under certain conditions, attending Stations of the Cross, specified pilgrimages, so that's where this comes into play, equate to acts of penance that reduce the temporal punishment owed to God. So if we do certain meritorious things, we basically get time off purgatory. Catholic theology teaches us restoring the justice with God. The Catholic Church has the authority to specify acts which count towards remission of time in purgatory. That's to say, the Catholic Church can offer indulgences. And so we finally reach the point of our slide. What is an indulgence? It's something, a certain virtuous act that the Catholic Church in its authority says you can perform under certain conditions to basically pay that temporal punishment to your God, earn time off purgatory so that you can go to heaven faster and stand before God in His beauty, His majesty, pure before Him in heaven. So, indulgences are frequently features of Christian pilgrimage, and that Christians go on pilgrimage in order to attain indulgences. There's a spiritual intention, it's a spiritual act that pilgrims undertake. It's a virtuous act that earns remission of time in purgatory. We could also say that tourism can be a historical element of Christian pilgrimage. Everyone likes to go to new places and see beautiful, fancy new things. So there's a tourist element, I think, baked into the tradition of Christian pilgrimage, but not tourism as we conceive it. Remember, historically, the West has been a deeply religious society, and people are very aware of God, and they're very aware of the realities of heaven and hell, death, judgment, all these things. It's saturated in daily life, and so people may be going on tourism, but it's not sort of a secular tourism, it's all about having fun. There's also traditionally a spiritual purpose to it. I want to talk more about the touristic quality of Christian pilgrimage, though, by turning to the economics of pilgrimage. So this is a feature historically of pilgrimage that we ought to consider as we examine this phenomenon. The key point to note is that pilgrimage sites historically are and have been economic wealth centers. So pilgrimage locations generate a lot of wealth for the local community. Just think, if you travel to Rome, if you travel to Santiago de Compostela, if you travel to Jerusalem, pilgrims bring their money. They spend a lot of that money there, paying for accommodations, buying food, maybe buying souvenirs or trinkets to bring home, maybe making a donation to the local church that's housing the relics, etc. So pilgrimage sites are economic wealth centers for a local community, and that means that the pilgrimage industry has historically been lucrative for the local people that live there. This has meant that overseers of certain holy sites, pilgrimage sites, have historically had a vested interest in promoting pilgrimage and also controlling attractive sites. So the monks that oversee a church with particular precious relics have an interest in cultivating pilgrimage industries so that people travel there, They spend money in the local community. They might even make a nice donation to monks that helps fund the monastery. This meant too, as I said, that historically, overseers of pilgrimage sites have sought to control attractive sites. So you want the relics of a particularly holy saint. You want the relics of the Mother of God. You want precious relics associated with Jesus Christ. The better your relics, the more pilgrims that are going to come, and the more income will be generated by the local community. This has meant historically that there's this sort of underbelly of the history of Christian pilgrimage, and that communities have often fought over custody of relics. So there's certain historical examples where a figure will travel, a saint, a known saint will travel basically to a site, and he'll unexpectedly die there, and the monks that tend the site where he died hit the jackpot. So for example, Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican friar in the 1200s AD. He spent most of his life in both Paris and Italy, but as he got a little older, he was traveling to the north of Italy on the way to a major church council. He just got sick along the way. He died at a Cistercian monastery in the north of Italy. He's not a Cistercian, he's a Dominican. But he had been basically convalescing at the Cistercian monastery, and the Cistercians that controlled that site hit the jackpot. Aquinas died there, they had his body. The Dominicans, of course, wanted the body back. They refused to give it to them. And there's a lot of contention over controlling the body of Aquinas, because people want relics, they want desirable objects. There's traditions of saints dying and crowds surround them, and they're waiting for them to die so they can like rip apart the body and take pieces of hair, pieces of skin, whatever they can get, because these are attractive objects that people want. And it's not, I mean, it's kind of morbid in a way, but it's also, there's piety there. They want the object of a saint because they want to venerate the saint. One interesting phenomenon in the Middle Ages that ties in all this is something called furta sacra, which in Latin means holy thefts. So furta means theft, sacra means holy. And this is a phenomenon that you see, it's a whole genre of events in the medieval world especially, where communities would steal relics of a saint and move them to a new shrine. So there's stories about a monk going undercover. He's a monk at one monastery, he'll go undercover for 10 years and go to another monastery that has particularly prized relics, basically infiltrate the monastery, and after 10 years work his way up the hierarchy of the local monastery and be finally entrusted with the keys of the church that have the relics, and then the night he's entrusted with the keys, he'll sneak away with the relics that he kept there, return to his true monastery and bring the relics there. So that's something you read about. It's a series of events that will happen in the Middle Ages. Another famous furta sacra is the scene in the background here, depicting the theft of the relics of St. Mark. So this story proceeds thus. St. Mark the Apostle, according to Christian tradition, went to Egypt, and he evangelized Egypt in the first centuries of Christianity, the zeros AD. He died there, and the bishops of Alexandria, which was one of the largest cities in the world at the time, presented themselves as the heirs of St. Mark, and they kept his relics in the local cathedral of Alexandria, a city in Egypt. Venetian sailors in the 700s AD visited Alexandria, and while they were there, they wanted the relics of St. Mark for their own city, and so they snuck into the church, they bribed the guards, and as you see here, they put the relics of St. Mark they removed them from the tomb, they put them amongst their cargo. According to the story, they basically hid the relics of St. Mark amongst like the food that they were shipping out of Alexandria. They cleared customs, and they brought the relics of St. Mark back to Venice, and they put the body in the cathedral there, and the relics of St. Mark remain in Venice to this day. So this depicts the theft of the relics of St. Mark. Now, in the Middle Ages, it was called a furta sacra, holy theft, because the argument was that if you succeed in stealing the relics of a saint, that means the saint didn't want to be in the place where he was originally buried in the first place. So the saint wanted his body removed, he assisted you, gave you the ability to do it. So this is a trend that you'll see where they say, well, he didn't want to be there anyway, and that's why we successfully. So we've answered the question, why go on pilgrimage, and talked about some historical features on it. Let's turn to our final point, the question of where do people go on pilgrimage. So now we'll consider some specific locales that are from the preeminent sites of pilgrimage in the Christian tradition and examine these. So this map is a map showing historic routes of Christian pilgrimage. As you can see, there's so many sites an interconnected nexus of holy locales throughout Europe. But I've selected the most important historically in the tradition sites of pilgrimage to talk about now. So first and foremost, hands down and above all else, the most important site of pilgrimage that was assigned the greatest significance in Christian tradition is the Holy Land in the Near East. The Holy Land was considered to be so important for probably obvious reasons. It had the places where Jesus Christ himself had once walked. The Holy Land was very difficult and dangerous to reach, especially for people in Western Europe. So if you're from England or from France or from Spain or Germany or Italy, you're facing a very perilous journey to travel across pretty much the known world to visit the holy sites in the Holy Land. But there's a reason that pilgrims have been and are historically willing to do such. It's because, as we've said, the most important pilgrimage destination of all is the land due to the fact that it's the land of the Bible. It's the land of the Old Testament, so here is one of the most often visited historically, not so much today because it's kind of dangerous to get there, but this was a very important historical pilgrimage site and remains so today in the Christian tradition. This is Mount Sinai, so this is the site where in the Old Testament we read that God visited Moses and gave him the law. And you see here a monastery. Mount Sinai is actually not this mountain, it's a little bit over here, it's like to the left of that. It's much taller. But this is the oldest continuous site of Christian monasticism in the world. This monastery was built by a Roman emperor in the 500s AD, and it has been continuously inhabited by monks, they are Greek Orthodox monks, for 1,500 years. It's a pretty dangerous site to visit today. It's in Egypt. The Egyptian government doesn't have great control over the Sinai. It's a pretty lawless region. But this is one of the great pilgrimage sites of sort of the Holy Land broadly conceived that we read about in the Old Testament. And this monastery today houses the best collection of early Christian icons in the world. So it's a fabulous site you can ever get out there. Other holy sites associated with the Old Testament are this, Mount Carmel, the site where Elijah from the Old Testament spent much of his life. The Holy Land is the land of the Bible, the land of the Old Testament, but probably more significantly for historic Christian pilgrims is that the Holy Land is the site of the New Testament, the land where Jesus Christ himself once walked, the land he graced with his physical presence as the incarnate Lord. So for example, one major site of Christian pilgrimage in the Holy Land is Bethlehem, where the Nativity, the birth of the Lord, took place. Areas in the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus Christ performed his public ministry. But most important of all, of course, is the site of all sites, the destination of all destinations, Jerusalem, precisely, which has the Holy Sepulchre, the church built over the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. So in Christian imagination, in the Christian universe, the Holy Land is the most important place in the world, and as such, it's been one of the most desirable, the most prestigious, the most prized places to visit for Christian pilgrims. After the Holy Land, at least in Western tradition, Rome has historically been a very, very important site. Rome in Italy. It became the most important destination in the continent of Europe from a very early period. There's again an obvious reason for this. Rome houses the relics of two of the great apostles of Christian tradition, Peter and Paul. Rome was also graced with many, many martyrs. Many people died for their faith under the pagan emperors when Christianity was still a small movement within the Roman Empire. Paganism was the official religion of the Roman state, and as such, the Roman emperors would persecute and attack and even execute Christians for refusing to worship pagan gods due to their sole exclusive devotion to the God of Israel. So there are the bones of many martyrs in Rome, and pilgrims have historically visited that city for that reason. Rome also features many, many magnificent churches. Probably the most famous of them all is this one, St. Peter's Basilica on Vatican Hill, which stands above the shrine of St. Peter, where St. Peter's bones are kept. So historically, there have been four major pilgrimage churches to visit in Rome. There's many, many more. You could go to Rome and spend a month there and visit a handful of churches every day and not see them all. But historically, there have been four major churches to visit during a pilgrimage to Rome. One of them is the church we just briefly saw, St. Peter's. on the Vatican. So let's talk about St. Peter's for a second. Here you see the church. This is one of the great monuments of the Renaissance and the Baroque. This building dates only from the 1600s, so it's later than some of the stuff we've been seeing previously. The piazza itself is very famous, but this is one of the most magnificent churches in Christendom, the largest Catholic church in the world, and it stands above the site, housing the relics of St. Peter. So there's a frontal view. You go on the inside, it houses many exquisite, magnificent objects of Christian art. The baldacchino that stands over the altar is particularly famous, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of the great churches of the world, one of the great churches of the city of Rome. I'm going to only talk about one of these other churches for now. The other church I'd like to talk about in Rome is St. John Lateran. This church is interesting. Historically, it's one of the major pilgrimage churches, but it's especially interesting for our purposes because this is actually the Pope's cathedral. People assume St. Peter's is the cathedral church of the Pope, but actually it's not. That's where he lives, and that's where the papal apartments are. But historically, the cathedral of the Pope, the chair on which he sits as bishop, his cathedral is St. John Lateran, which is also in Rome. You see it here. It too is decorated with wondrous artistic objects on the inside. You see a medieval mosaic there. But you see enshrined in the apse the cathedra of the Pope, again, his bishop's chair. That word cathedral comes from this word cathedra. Cathedral becomes the word to refer to a bishop's church, his personal church, but it's named after the seat in which the bishop sits in that church. So this is the cathedra, the seat on which he sits, and then the cathedral is the larger church in which that seat is housed. So here's the Bishop of Rome's cathedra in St. John Lateran, his cathedral. After Rome, historically, the second most important pilgrimage site in the West, in Europe, is this one, Santiago de Compostela, which today is in Spain. Santiago de Compostela became an important pilgrimage site in the 800s AD due to the discovery of the relics of James the Apostle. So, make a long story short, the relics of this great apostle were discovered there and verified to be his relics, and very shortly thereafter, this became a very, very attractive pilgrimage destination in the West. You can see so many pilgrimage routes lead here to Santiago de Compostela in the northwest of Spain. Today, that site features a massive, pretty big Baroque-style cathedral. The front is from 1740, so it's from 1,000 years after the discovery of the relics of St. James. You see the front of the cathedral here, and many, many people today go on the Camino and they walk to visit this site. You see the figure right there, the center piece of the facade, is none other than St. James himself, and St. James is dressed like a pilgrim. This is what pilgrims historically were dressed like. You can see he's got the hat that pilgrim would wear to protect them from the elements. He's got a staff. He's also got on his hat a badge, the seashell, which was the specific sort of symbol of Santiago de Compostela. And St. James is frequently depicted in Christian art in this fashion. Here you see another image of St. James dressed like a pilgrim himself. Santiago de Compostela features the largest thurible, the swinging metal incense thing in the world. If you go there, you can see it. It's called the ⴱᴜᴜ, and they swing it. It weighs hundreds of kilograms. It's made of silver. When they start swinging, it goes 60, 70 miles an hour. Showering the whole church with clouds of incense. I have a video of it, but I need to be connected to Wi-Fi and I'm not, so we unfortunately can't see that. But if you go on YouTube and type in ⴱᴜᴜ, you can see this massive metal incense thing whipping through the church, throwing incense everywhere. Oh, it does work. I do have incense. Here we go. So yeah, there I do have Wi-Fi. So it takes a whole crew of men to tug at it, and they just start to get it going. You'll see. It's hilarious. It's this huge, huge thurible. We'll start to get it going. There we go. They gotta really get it going. There's a team. But yeah. You would not want to get hit with this thing. I think they only do it on Sundays now. Yeah. It's really gonna get going. Here we go. It's really that guy's funny, it's just.
Is this during mass?
I believe so, yeah. I unfortunately, I've been to this cathedral, but I've never been there where they do this.
I have seen it.
You've seen it?
I've seen it.
Do they do it during Mass?
No, they do it after mass.
They do it after Mass, okay.
Yeah, right after mass.
Yeah. Here it goes. I think it's just every Sunday, as I recall. Yeah.
We were there on Sundays.
I see, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, you're going? Oh, you have to see it? So you can see it whipping around. See, I cheated when I went to Santiago de Compostela. Most people travel for weeks by foot, braving all these perils to get there. When I went there, I was just that day in Porto, which is in the north of Portugal, and I just saw everything I was sitting on and I thought, and I had the afternoon, I just thought, well, I don't really want to stick around, so I just looked up the bus schedule and saw there was a bus to Santiago in 2 hours, so I just hopped on the bus, and 2 hours later I was there, and I showed up at my hotel, and they asked, are you a pilgrim? And I said, kind of, like, I didn't really earn it, but I am, I guess. So that's Santiago de Compostela. The final site I want to talk about is one of the other major pilgrimage destinations in the west, Canterbury, which is in England, on the south east coast of England. Canterbury was the first historical bishopric of England. So the English were pagan around the year 600 AD, but in 600 AD, the Bishop of Rome, Gregory the Great, sent a missionary group of monks to England, and they evangelized the English people. And by 700 AD, most of England was Christian. The first bishopric that was established in England was in Canterbury because when the first monks arrived there, the missionaries, they just crossed the English Channel, they arrived right there, and that became the first bishopric. So Canterbury already had a long prestige in Christian tradition, but in the year 1170, something particularly significant happened there. It became even more hallowed as a site because the Bishop of Canterbury was martyred due to a dispute he got with the king. So I'll talk about that now. This figure, Thomas Becket, who is a saint in the Catholic Church, is one of the great saints of England, was originally sort of a government official, a bureaucrat of the King of England. He was his personal friend. The bishopric of Canterbury became vacant, and so the king wanted to control the church locally, basically did some machinations to get his friend nominated and elected Bishop of Canterbury and installed as bishop, because he thought he could control the church in England if his friend was bishop. Once Thomas Becket became bishop, however, he began to sort of defy the king and stand up to the king. He began to wear a hair shirt and behave like a saint, and he wouldn't let the king just boss around the church and seize the church's wealth. He basically governed the church in a way that was in the church's best interests, not in the state's, not in the king's best interests. So this aroused the fury of King Henry. His former friend betrayed him, he thought, and Henry was out hunting with some of his knights. It's kind of the equivalent of golfing in the Middle Ages. You're out with your buddies hunting. And Henry is reputed to have said, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" And he's talking about Thomas Becket. He's so sick of Thomas Becket being a thorn in his side. Some of Henry's knights took that statement literally and rode off to Canterbury, and they attacked Thomas Becket while he was in his cathedral, and they killed him. So Thomas Becket was slain in his own cathedral. This became a sensational event in the world of medieval Europe. Instantly, Thomas Becket was hailed throughout Europe as a great martyr, a great saint, and his relics were distributed throughout Europe. Another frequent reliquary that you'll see in the museums of Europe is this, the ʟᴠᴇᴅ style that we saw in gold with the blue enamel. But there are many, many reliquaries that show St. Thomas Becket being martyred, and this reliquary would house relics of Thomas Becket, and that's why it's got the seat on the side. But Canterbury had already been an important site. Now it became the precious house of Thomas Becket's relics, and so it attracted even more pilgrims. Later, a larger Gothic cathedral was built on the site, and it's gone down in memory as a particularly prominent pilgrimage site. If you go there today, you can see the site of the church where Thomas Becket himself was martyred, and maybe if you read the Canterbury Tales, the famous piece of medieval English literature by Chaucer. The pilgrims are going to Canterbury, they're going on pilgrimage there, and they're going there especially because that's where Becket's relics were held. Canterbury remains the preeminent site of English Christianity today. That's why the head of the Anglican community, the Anglican Church, is the Archbishop of Canterbury, because it's The Anglican Church, the Church of England in Canterbury, is the preeminent bishopric in England. So we've talked about major pilgrimage sites in Christian tradition. I want to commend one more to you. It's not quite so probably fabulous, although it is a nice Gothic cathedral. It's much cheaper to get to though. That's our own cathedral. Because due to the Jubilee year, certain indulgences, certain privileges are offered to local pilgrims who visit their own cathedral for spiritual purposes. This option is available to you all. You have the possibility of visiting your local cathedral and under certain conditions, attaining the benefits of traveling to more far-flung locales in this year of Jubilee. And I should say, we really do have a nice neo-Gothic cathedral. We're blessed with a beautiful building. So we've reached the end of the presentation. In sum, I want to give you a few lines to reflect on as we consider the significance of pilgrimage, the importance of this Jubilee year. I'm going to offer first a quote from Pope Benedict, where he's discussing pilgrimage, and he, again, sort of summarizes, communicates some of the concepts we've been exploring throughout our time together today. Pope Benedict says, to go on pilgrimage is not simply to visit a place, to admire its treasures of nature, art, or history. So it's not just pure tourism, just seeing beautiful things, although that can be part of it. To go on pilgrimage really means to step out of ourselves in order to encounter God, where he has revealed himself, where his grace has shone with particular splendor and produced rich fruits of conversion and holiness among those who believe. And this is different than classic conceptions of peregrinus that we saw when we started the lecture. Remember, for the ancient Romans, to be a peregrinus, to be a foreigner, was something to lament the pitiable homeless wanderer. So to be a peregrinus before Christianity, to be a foreigner, to be a traveler, to be an alien, was sort of an undesirable condition that wasn't something that people wanted. But for Christians, it became a state to be embraced, a holy condition apart from the normal features of everyday life, where one assumes spiritual duties, obligations, goals, desires, in order to purify oneself and grow closer to God and increase in the devout life. Another paradox is we can talk about Christian pilgrimage on earth, we can talk about being pilgrims to Rome, to Jerusalem, to Canterbury, to Santiago, even to our own local cathedral. So you can sort of, in the temporal phase of life that we all live, enter on pilgrimage within your larger life. But from a Christian perspective, if we zoom out even further than that, really our lives themselves as a whole are pilgrimages on earth, right? We know our true home, our true destination is heaven, and we're living this life on pilgrimage, trying to get there, performing virtuous actions in everyday life, worshiping God, praising God, trying to grow in holiness, so that on this pilgrimage that we endure in our present condition, we might finally reach our true destination, the heavenly palace in which God resides and where he is enthroned forever. So my final passage is this medieval author, Peter of Blois. He's writing in the 1100s AD. And he says, do you not know that the life of man on earth is a pilgrimage? We're all on pilgrimage at all times on this earth, trying to get to our heavenly destination where God ultimately resides. Thank you again so much. I wanted to tell you all too, if you enjoyed this, I teach with the lay division at the seminary. I teach a history class every year. It's basically the same class that the seminarians take. Only it's for the laity. So the seminarians take a 2-semester history class, and part of the preparation for the priesthood. Fortunately for the lay division, I'm able to actually offer that class. It's usually on Wednesday evenings for about 2 hours, and it's the whole year, spring, fall. So if you're interested, feel free to just be in touch with the lay division, and you can come with the class. So I just wanted to make you aware of that in case you enjoyed this. But thank you all so much again. It's really great to finally stop this parent. Yeah, so if you go to the lay division's website, the contact information, you can just email the director, and he would be able to sign you up for the class. But yeah, you have
Other classes as well.
What's that?
Are there other classes other than?
There's many classes. I teach a history one.
I see.
So yeah, so if you like the topics about Constantine or the martyrs or the Middle Ages or the Crusades or the Baroque, like we have days where we talk about all those topics. Yeah. Oh, great. Where is that? That is in the Rhoda, okay, that's a great protocol. That's great. I love the Spanish. I love the Spanish. That's great. Yeah, no, the Spanish, it's so dramatic and like intense. It's great. Last year, that's great. That's great. Thank you.
It's a different one. Yeah, we have the same name. Everyone confused me. No, I always get first. Because I know that he was here. But we have the same. It happens all the time. Where are you going to start? Okay, that's good. That's gonna be easy. Yeah. I hope you have a good trip. Appreciate it. Okay. Yeah, no, I like that. To where? Oh, yeah. And that's a great thing. Well, are you following? Yeah, I've been to like, Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, yeah. All right. People want to, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, people want relics. It can get pretty violent all the time. Like just,
But not now.
well, not all books are safe, so I really.
Oh, right.
But yeah. I mean, for example, like the body of ⴑ really. Lots of short people for a long time. Yeah.
Not for me, but.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I
No,
appreciate it.
thank you. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry I'm so bad on recording. I'm usually actually quite good with that. I really So,
Yeah, I think I told you, if you want it, because the thing that you sounded interested in, I agree with you. I wrote you about the group.
Yeah, I have that.
Okay, yeah, if you want, I can just give them your email, and you can go. That's what you like?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it sounds kind of like what you were looking for, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just, the person. Yeah, it was good to
Thank
meet
you,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanna say thank you that I was just in Spain.
Oh,
2
great,
weeks
great.
with the pilgrimage. So, our priest celebrated mass on Sunday there in Santiago.
So you were just there?
I was just there in the fall,
Oh,
in
great.
September.
That's wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, and I was going, I was crying when that was going,
Yeah,
because it's so emotional, the church is just filled with that incense.
yeah. That's great, I'm glad you got to see it.
Yeah, but anyway, thank you.
Did you walk there?
We did, well, we only walked 3 hours.
It's
Because
still
we were-
better than I did.
The Holy Hill of Joy, we were at the Holy Hill of Joy.
Yeah,